Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to our next video in the series of videos that we have been doing for you. Just as a preliminary point, as always, the information that we provide is generally for your guidance and is not intended to be legal advice. If you need any assistance, then please contact our team, who are always here to help you. You have all probably heard about talk about Clause 9, and before I come on to that, what I want to say is that nationality is probably our most important right, and it's been defined and looked at as being the right to have rights. And it's ironic that today the powers that the government has already to take away that right are so wide and so vast and so draconian but nevertheless the government is not content with what it's got, and it wants to expand those powers far more. It's time that we all stood up and fully campaigned wholeheartely against this law. And thankfully already the House of Lords have voted down this new proposal, but it's very much open to the government to still bring back this legislation. And I think that it's high time that the general public puts pressure on the government not to proceed with these proposed changes. We have had laws in place for cancellation and revocation of nationality for over 100 years, and when these provisions were first brought in, they were intended to be only for those cases where someone had shown real disloyalty to the state and disaffection. And over the years the test has adapted and often been described as being a very high threshold and only to be used in cases where someone has done something very seriously prejudicial to the interests of the state. But in the last 20 years or so, there has been a strong move to water down this test. And the test is now one simply of whether or not it's conducive to the public good as to whether or not your nationality should be taken away from you. The test in law since 2006 for cancellation or revocation of your nationality has been whether it's conducive to the public good. And there's no formal legal definition of this, although there is some guidance that the Home Office have published in which the courts would apply. And this includes involvement in terrorism, espionage, serious organised crime, being involved in war crimes, and probably the most concerning aspect of this is whether you've engaged in what are otherwise described as unacceptable behaviours. So nobody really knows what sort of unacceptable behaviours you would have to be engaged in order for your nationality to be taken away from you, and it's really disconcerting that this most important of rights, and in fact the most important right that you could have, could be taken away for what is so loosely defined as unacceptable behaviours. It's hoped that it would be by reference to the other types of offences that have been defined, for example, involvement in terrorism, espionage. But in recent years, organised crime has been brought into the fray, and other lesser offences have been used in order to take people's citizenship away from them. The proposed changes to the law in Clause 9 is not necessarily about expanding the powers to take away your citizenship, but that is more to do with notice. And until recently, there was provision where if the Home Office didn't know where the individual was and certain criteria were met, notice of that could simply be served on a file. Thankfully, the courts held that was illegal, and the Secretary of State had no such powers to simply serve notice of taking away of someone's citizenship on a Home Office file. But what the government has tried to do with this Clause 9 is not just to try to regain that power, but it actually is after far more. And this proposed change would, if it goes through, would allow the government to take away someone's citizenship without giving any form of notice whatsoever, and so someone could be in blissful ignorance going on a holiday abroad only to find that they've lost their citizenship and can't come back to the UK at all. So the question is, can all British citizens lose their citizenship? And essentially the answer to that is yes, and this is primarily targeted at people with foreign ancestry, people who have naturalised or registered as British citizens, but also importantly, remember that British citizens by birth can also lose their citizenship if it's deemed conducive to the public good. If you are a dual citizen, then the only test that needs to be satisfied for your nationality to be revoked is that it's conducive to the public good. If you only have British citizenship and no other citizenship at all, then there's a slightly higher threshold that applies, and you could potentially also be made stateless in those circumstances if the Secretary of State thinks that you may be able to gain the citizenship of another country. There's one very important misconception that I want to clear up. There is this common perception that if an individual doesn't hold a passport of another country, that they can't be a dual national. That is not correct at all. You can be a dual national even if you don't hold a passport of that country, and often that the question of dual nationality depends on your parents' ancestry and the laws of the country from which your parents come, and whether or not they are able to transmit their citizenship automatically to you. And many people are dual citizens in this way without necessarily knowing about this. All in all, anyone could potentially lose their citizenship under these provisions, and in reality the only people that are exempted from this process is someone who doesn't have any foreign ancestry at all, were born in the UK, and their parents and grandparents were all born in the UK. But if you don't fall into one of those categories, you potentially subject to these deprivation provisions if you engage in activities which are not deemed to be conducive to the public good. There is one other way in which nationality can be lost, and that is if it was obtained in the first instance through fraud, deception, or misrepresentation. So therefore it's very important when anybody is making an application to ensure that the fullest and correct information is given in support of the application, to avoid the risk of this being possibly taken away from you in the future. And the important thing to bear in mind with nationality obtained by deception is that in those circumstances the law permits you to be made stateless. So in recent years, not only has the test for revocation of citizenship been lowered to make it easier and easier for nationality to be taken away from you, but the Home Office have employed some very dirty tactics in the process to ensure that they make it as difficult as possible for you to actually fight for this right when it's taken away from you. So often what the Home Office do is wait for someone to leave the UK before revoking their citizenship, and in the past they had to give you notice unless they met some specific criteria which enabled them to serve notice on a file. But with this new provision under Clause 9, this will give the Home Office carte blanche and such wide powers to enable them not to give you any notice at all. So you could be sat somewhere in some foreign country for years and years, and when you look to come back to the UK, only then to realise that you haven't been a British citizen for many years. And this is so objectionable, and that's why I feel that it's so important that all of you do take time to correspond with your MPs and lobby your MPs to try to ensure that this provision is not brought into law. So with this dirty tactic that the Home Office are using, waiting for people to go overseas before revoking their citizenship, and although I've said you could be overseas for many years before realising that your citizenship has been taken away, In the same way, you could just be going on a week, 2 weeks holiday, and then find that you're stuck in the middle of nowhere because your citizenship has been taken away from you, and you will end up spending many, many years trying to challenge the revocation of your citizenship. There are rights to appeal against any decision to revoke your citizenship, but if you're abroad, it will be very, very difficult for you to challenge this revocation. And even if you are in country, you should now be aware that not only has the powers generally been widened to take away your citizenship, the Home Office now want a power not to even give you notice, but recently the courts have held that the right of appeal is much more restricted. So all in all, it is much, much more easier to lose your citizenship, and if you are ever served with notice of cancellation of your citizenship, then it's very important that you get immediate specialist legal advice in relation to that. Finally, I implore that all of you take time to contact your MPs about this Clause 9 and make your voices heard. I hope that you found this video helpful. Please like, share and subscribe to our channel.